We're back, and we're a little late simply because we dinner life a little late. So, we've had some discussion since we last met. We have yet another option, which I think is option 3A.
Correct.
A revision to the option that we ended up with yesterday, which is 3A. And then we've discussed issues on option 5. And there was a discussion particularly about, we have had some conversation about the two investigator positions that the sheriff had requested, as well as the issue we brought up today. The sheriff taking those dollars and apply it to some sort of summer bonus scheme. Actually, at the request of one commissioner, I just polled folks, and I've kind of polled folks, and it's 3-3 with one person yet to make a decision. So we're kind of, so I guess that could be left for tomorrow. And at some point, we'll get a decision on that tomorrow. So any other, and I haven't compared, I didn't have a copy of 5, but there's one difference, and help me maybe figure this out.
But let Kyle go through it and you'll understand the difference.
No, there's two numbers. I've already looked at it. There are two numbers. I need an example. I need an explanation on two of the numbers.
Okay. We have them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Didn't have my mic on, I apologize.
So this is option 3A. And so what we've done in this option is, so for the sheriff, and I guess this is what Chairman Martin was referring to. We could do it either way. So originally it had the sheriff with 2 investigator positions, and then I've also heard, to just remove those 2 positions and just give the sheriff the funds for detention, recruitment, retention. And so that's what's shown here. And then the other difference really was just the recasting of the funds in budget reserve. It moved the funds for the budget reserve for the school system to $1 million, and then placed $688,867 in a budget reserve for the county. And I think that was really the difference there between 3 and 3A.
Well, what about the, I got 2 questions. One is on the,
One moment, please.
Sure. Sorry.
What do you think?
I guess so, maybe it's okay now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, speak up, the bug's not quite big enough.
The $200,000 in parentheses of basically reversing the county manager's recommendation on the additional funds for Medicaid expansion, that seems to be put back in on option 3A.
That's correct. Yeah, you're right.
Oh, it actually says reverse, so it should be in parentheses. Which is it?
It was not.
We were saving it under mine. This expends it, so.
Right, so.
Oh, yeah, this is reversing.
3A, so this one actually, this one does not show that, DSS Medicaid expansion. It just, so I guess in this one, and I can change that if you guys would prefer, but in this one, the Medicaid expansion funds would still remain in there. That's right.
3A.
In 3A.
Is this 3A?
This is 3A.
Okay, yeah, turn it over, thank you. No, turn it the other way.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think they were on the other side. Yeah, that 200,000, is that what you're asking about?
So, right, so in, I can't remember, I think it was option, that's what it was, in option 4.
Well, hang on.
In option 4, we reversed it. In option 3, as originally put out, it did not remove this, the Medicaid expansion for DSS. Medicaid expansion has $200,000 in it. And in option 3, it still had that. In option 4, that came out and on the
It's
backside.
washed out, yeah.
Huh?
So it just washed out.
So it was washed out, but it's not washed out on this one. And so it's still in there on this one. The Medicaid expansion is still in there on this one.
And I guess one point I'd make is, even though, I mean, if the sheriff got down the road and chose to come back and say, you know, I've looked at my detention recruitment and what I want to do there, and I really do want one or both of those officers back, obviously he would have, what he would take is he'd have to come back to the board, because y'all do actually restrict the number of certified law enforcement officers that he has, and so, but that's options available to him all the time, anytime, within his regular budget anyway, so.
So what's the reason for taking them out? Lowering the price, or?
The only thing that Kyle did here was just rename that, take the same money for the 2 officers and just called it Funds for Detention Recruitment.
Which gives him the opportunity to,
The money's still there, he can just do what he wants.
Okay.
This lets him do that with it.
Well, but I'm sorry, I was actually looking at something else while you were talking, so I wasn't paying attention. So did you say that the sheriff can do what he wants to with the, if the 230, he could still decide to, in other words, if we put it in the budget as to add those 2 positions that he did request,
Yeah.
then those should stay, is that not correct? And he can't just he can't recash those positions in.
The only point I was making is that if he changes his mind and wants to put the positions back in, it would take another action of the board.
Okay, correct. So the way this one's written, that's what we did the polling, what I was doing the polling about,
Right.
which is tied at the moment, and Richard is the tiebreaker on that.
Yeah, but so that we can be clear, Dudley, you're saying that to put this 200,000 in unreserved for those other 2 positions if he has need of it in the future. Is that what you're saying?
No, the only thing I was saying about this is since we've changed it to be Funds for Detention Recruitment Retention, instead of those 2 positions, if he changed his mind, he would have to come back to the board.
Yeah, but I'm saying, is it enough to still put the 2?
Yes.
That's
Same
what I was- that's what- No. Wait a minute, make sure that you understand me. Is it enough, another 233,000 to put back in here for those other 2 officers? In addition to the 233,000 that he's asking for the salary savings, $3 stipend for the detention officers for
You
the
could, you
summer.
have, in option 3A, you have
Yes, sir,
$688,867.
that's what I'm saying. I think it's still some available.
Now, is part of this, or later, or?
Yes, sir.
whatever?
I just didn't want him to have to come back, and if it was already in there, it was there. And if we had it, we had it. So thank you.
So actually, leaving the Medicaid, let me see if I'm reading, yeah. In the difference, I'm looking at the difference between 5 and 3, so where that shows up was down at the bottom, leaving the Medicaid cushion, if you, sort of a contingency. It shows up in the end at the 3 lines from the bottom, reduced budget reserve, non-departmental, but instead of being in option 5, that is $2,246,386, and then that 200,000 is actually that number becomes less in option 3A. That's just the trade-off.
That's right. So
That's the trade-off of the 200,000 that leaves it in, keeps the recycling centers open.
That's correct.
It leaves the expansion in, which then ultimately reduces the budget reserve, and it changes 3 of the, and then the one other issue is that in today's discussion, that did not include option 5, there was just discussion on Crossnor, basically, Crossnor is in neither option, and neither option and the Partnership for Prosperity, which was removed in an early discussion, remains in option 3.
3A, yes.
So there are several differences between the two. So maybe a good thing to do, well, I think that decision is, and that's kind of I really was not a part of the discussion on the Crossnor part, is whether that needs to appear. I was going to suggest we just have option 3A and option 5 tomorrow, and then we can vote. And we may need to separate out the issue of the 2 sheriff's positions and the bonus issue as a separate vote. That may need to be a separate vote.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with that thought that you just dropped out. Why don't we wait until tomorrow?
Yeah, we can do that, and then the question is, for Crossnor, does it need to show up anywhere? That's kind of the question. I mean, that's kind of, there are others that may want to weigh in on that.
Crossnor does show up in
Oh, yeah, it actually is.
Five.
It is in option 5. You're right, it is there. That got changed today. I guess that maybe did get changed today.
Crossnor
That's
showed
part of the
up in
problem,
option
that too
5.
many.
Crossnor, option 5, right before 3A.
You're right, it does have
That was the first time Crossnor showed up, was option 5.
if in
But we had that discussion today,
Right, which is why option 5.
and you changed it today in option 5. It got changed, you're right. And it removed the partnership part got removed. Thank you.
In 5, yes.
That's another distinct difference between
I'd be happy
3A
to,
and 5.
you know,
Thank
also, excuse me, I'd be happy to kind of, I mean, I can create a sheet that shows the special appropriation funding across the different options, if that would be helpful, but
That's good.
And so we could have 5 and 3A tomorrow. We can make a decision tomorrow on the sheriff's, either the 2 investigators or the bonus. And Commissioner Linville asked us right before break about the issue of the ARPA funds and and those agencies that ask for alternative or special appropriations. And I asked Chantel if she just talked through some of that by the organizations that are on this list that also received ARPA funds, because that was on our original list. We actually had those agencies that received ARPA funds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are 6 organizations on the list that received ARPA funds, and look like there are recommendations from the board to allocate for this year's budget. The first one being Arts Council received $4.5 million in ARPA funds. It looks like the board is potentially recommending $100,000 for this budget. And the difference is that they are asking for operating expenses in this year's budget, which is different than the ARPA funds, which was to help other arts-based organizations. Children's Law Center received $840,000 of ARPA funds. That was to primarily add more staff for them to assist more of the youth that they represent. In speaking with their executive director, their request is for operating expenses for some core staff that is unrelated to what they are utilizing the ARPA funds for.
Can I stop you 1 second?
Sure.
When you mentioned that, that's another difference between option 5 and option 3A, because yesterday, when we left and we're looking at option 3, we had not heard back from the Children's Law Center. There was a question that was asked that was, in fact, came later after we left. And so the $50,000 was in the Children's Law Center. It is not in 3A. That's an issue that's missing.
Okay,
I
thank
want to
you.
clarify that. Sorry, continue. You've done 2 out of the 6. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Experiment and Self-Reliance received $93,300 in ARPA funds. That was to assist our small business IDA program. The amount that's being recommended for them this time would be operating for our IDA for home ownership program, as well as some operating expenses. For Callidium received $100,000 in ARPA funds. That was primarily for some educational programming. This $275,000 request in this year's budget is for their operating expenses. Neighborhood Hands received $200,000 of ARPA funds. That was primarily for their food program. The amount that they are requesting this year's budget is for workforce development.
And I'd like to say, Chairman, if I can, relative to Neighborhood Hands, on last year when they got appropriations from ARPA, I just am trying to restore something that happened to them. I feel that was an error. It's not an error, but I just wanted to restore because they do have a need. They were supposed to get $350,000 last year, and it was reduced by one of the commissioners. It's not here anymore to $200,000, and I would like to restore that in this new work in special appropriations. Thank you.
For Old Salem, received $391,875 of ARPA funds. That was primarily for their renovation projects. This $120,000 request is for upgrades in technology and lighting. And that's the differences that I have between ARPA and what is being requested in special appropriations.
Thank you for that.
Also, just because I wasn't really comparing 3A and 5, the other difference in between the two, for Neighborhoods Hands in 3A, it's at 75,000, whereas in 5, it's at 100,000.
Yes.
And then also, Renolda House is at 5,000
Yes.
in 3A, and it's 10,000 in 5. And then the iBank is 50,000 in 3A, and it's 150,000 in 5.
Yes.
So there's the other differences that hadn't been mentioned.
A question I would have for the authors of 3A is whether they would be amenable to making the switch to include the Children's Law Center and Crossnor and remove the Partnership for Prosperity, which was the discussion, that was a discussion that took place earlier today.
Remove it.
Yeah, the 25,000 was removed. It's not, does not appear in option 5.
I think that's a good idea.
And that it does add Children's Law Center 50,000 and Crossnor for 50,000. Let me see, because, yeah, Crossnor is not in this list.
Chairman, if I may ask the authors of 3A, would they consider putting the sheriff's 2 officers back into their budget?
I think we can vote on that separately tomorrow.
Oh, okay, fair enough. That's fine.
Because I think we're obviously split on that, and we could just vote at the very beginning.
Okay.
When we get to the point of voting on the special appropriations, we could vote on the sheriff's part first, and then we could vote on the options of that.
So can I, okay, yeah, so for your 5, it's removing those 2 sheriffs, right? Is that still there for option 5?
Well, yeah, and the difference between, just take out option 5, the 2, in other words, we'll decide an A or B, if you will, or a star triangle or something, getting into stuff.
Okay.
But the point is, we'll decide the sheriff issue separately.
Separately, okay.
In both of them at
That's
the
fair.
beginning.
Okay.
We can
Thank
do
you.
that pretty easily.
Fair.
So, I'm confused again. Did the sheriff stood before us and said, take those positions away? Did he not? So now has he changed his mind and wants to add them back?
No, there are 3 commissioners that have changed, that want to leave them in.
Well, if I can say, Chairman, to Commissioner Woodsett, that
But I'm asking you.
Because Commissioner Woodbury went so intensively to remind us about the safety and concerns of our community, I thought that the Special Victims Investigator and Cyber Crimes Investigator was definitely important. Not saying that the detention officers aren't important, but I would prefer to be preventive on that end versus having individuals in our detention center.
Well,
So,
I'm fine with it. I just am trying to, I'm hearing two different things. So we'll vote tomorrow, whatever.
Well,
But I would like to hear from, I mean, I agree. I mean, I wanted to have the two new positions, but I also heard a very passionate plea to reduce that and give him the money for the detention center. So,
sure, so that I'm clear with you, Gloria, it's adding the funds for the detention center at 233, and also in addition to the sheriffs on a separate, the two sheriffs on a separate line item agenda.
make sure I'm understanding. Basically, I was suggesting on those two things, the difference in the 233 funds for detention, recruitment, retention, and the two positions that are listed in 5, I'm suggesting that we take that off the table between 5 and 3 and simply decide that as a separate vote at the beginning,
Right.
which direction to go.
right, because I've heard two different things.
It's the same amount of money, but it would be, are we going to suggest that they go to that they go to these positions? Or the last thing that the sheriff said, I mean, realize the sheriff requested those to start with.
He did.
So
I was just
if
trying
he
to do
also
both.
today said
I
he'd
think-
be willing to give those up.
Yeah, so I was just
But that doesn't
saying-
mean that all the commissioners have to agree with that.
Absolutely, I
So
agree.
we're we're just.
Just
we'll have
looking
to
at
decide.
what we had in terms of the balance, I thought that we could just put those back in there because they were important.
Say that again? Sorry.
That we had some reserves left over, so I figured that we could put that back in there.
I have a,
Meaning that we would double the sheriff's request to include the 233 for, in other words, increase our commitment by giving the sheriff both positions and
Yes, sir, that's what I'm saying.
and the other part.
Yes, sir, that's what I'm saying.
Well,
so maybe something to simplify it, maybe we put it back with the two positions, and just with a footnote that the sheriff is authorized to go ahead if he wishes to repurpose that money. I mean, he kind of can do that anyway.
Okay,
I mean, and so if you put him back in with the positions, it'll be in it, and that gives him a chance to analyze the situation a little bit further and make a decision. And if he chooses to eliminate those positions, it's just a matter of coming back to you and
Yeah,
correcting
that makes
it.
sense.
Yes, sir, I like that.
And that's
Thank
what
you.
that really kind of takes care of it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I
well,
like it.
it's, I'm not, that's my position, so I will not speak for the other positions, but there are other people who have the other position that may want to speak.
For the purpose of resolving our budgeting question, I am willing to back that as an alternative. Put the positions in and add narrative language authorizing the sheriff to alternatively use what would otherwise be basically permanent authorization for those two additional positions for what he was asserting in a moment of passionate delivery this afternoon. He would rather have that money for immediate use as a detention center bonus for as long as it lasted.
And we would probably characterize it as a short staff differential, because that's what we've done in the past. So,
Yeah, short-term staff
so
indenture.
in the narrative, we would
If
essentially
you're
say,
changing your mind in my polling, the polling now becomes 4-2 without Commissioner Linville.
So basically, it leaves them in. So it's a compromise. It leaves the positions in, but
Gives him
but
flexibility.
gives the sheriff.
Which is the same thing as saying he can do what he wants to do, which was where 3 commissioners were earlier, but 3 were not.
Actually, I would submit that it's a little different. What it is saying, we are prepared to authorize these 2 permanent, we are prepared to authorize 2 additional staff slots for deputies for these purposes, which you had asked for. If on reflection, you continue to believe that the more urgent need is to take those 2 staff people's funding and instead use them for the sort of the short-term differential for detention center employees for as long as it lasts, and when it's gone, then we defer to his on-the-ground judgment.
And it gives, he's the sheriff and he can make the decision, not
And
us.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to point out that in this decision, as the manager referred to, in the budget ordinance, you set the number of sworn law enforcement officers. So if there were a change in that would need to come back before you to change the number of sworn law enforcement officers. So it's not just something that the sheriff can change by himself. It would need to come before you.
I think what we're saying, though, is we would go ahead and adopt it like he's getting 2 additional positions, whether he uses the funds for those 2 positions is.
And perhaps include some narrative to what you're saying in there.
Well, but I
that
think-
if he uses that, we reduce them on the front end. I mean,
You would need to come back to reduce it unless you wanted to just leave 2 extra positions hanging out there.
So we cannot separately authorize as a narrative line in the budget ordinance that we are authorizing the sheriff to use these funds in this alternative manner, and if he does so, then the authority for the number of law enforcement sworn officers is reduced by 2.
We really need to be that really needs to be in the budget ordinance. And that is a relatively simple amendment. I mean, we've done that throughout the years. We changed it in the middle of the year. So that's something that Kyle's used to doing. So it could be done. I'm just saying that's an extra step.
Okay.
Okay. So you're-
Mr. Chairman, it seems like to me with the discussion and the question you asked me, I'm not going to need to come up with an answer.
Well, actually, what I just heard the attorney say is that you probably are. We're going to,
It looks like,
if we put it in the budget, it's going to require the sheriff to come back.
it looks like to me what is potentially going to happen, or could happen, is that we'd end up funding both of them. That's what it looks like to me. And that is not what you were asking.
No, it's not, and I'm not in favor of that.
So, and I thought that when we finally got to when you had the 2.1 for a decrease in tax, I thought, well, that'd probably be okay in reserve, but then I come to the conclusion, if it's in reserve, it can be spent. If it's like you had it, it can't be.
Yeah,
And so-
yeah, it goes into fund balance is what happens.
I know,
And so-
but it can't be, as Commissioner McDaniel's idea was, she was looking for a place for funds, so that I was just making an observation that we'd have used that, could nobody spend it? It'd just
If you never get it, you never spend it.
So,
Well,
I don't know, we're all going to have to, or at least me, is going to have to do a bunch of thinking tonight in order for us not to have a long evening tomorrow evening.
So I'll go back to the very first thing. At the first thing, after we finish the normal, when we get to this point for the special appropriations part, we will consider designating the two positions or not separately. Okay. We'll do that. And then, unless you're, and you're good with that. Okay. And I've actually had a conversation or two with the primary author of option 3A. And there may be a way we could get to a single option. And then we don't have to vote on two options tomorrow. And that would be by including the change we discussed earlier, which would be cross-NOR for 50, children's law for 50, removing Partnership for Prosperity, 25, increasing Neighborhoods Hands to 100, and increasing the iBank to 100.
To be clear, Mr. Chairman, what I asked to be thought about the special appropriations, I believe that was dead on arrival, wasn't it?
The request about taking special appropriations.
The ones that got,
That with the, well, I think Chantel's answers to the 6 agencies involved were that essentially all of their grants were specified for things that could not be operational. And quite frankly, we go monitor them. I mean, they can't pay for their day-to-day bills out of ARPA funds. And the requests we're getting in these agencies are for operating budgets. And actually, in fact, the Arts Council, Callidium, actually Crossnor, maybe a Children's Law Center, those have always, in fact, we have been giving those same amounts of money for some time. And I may have missed, Old Salem's also in that same category. That's 4 out of the 6 in the same category. Neighborhoods Hands is new, and Commissioner McDaniel made a comment about it. And the 6th one was Crossnor, and I don't remember. The Crossnor did not receive ARPA funds, correct?
They have received behavioral health funds in the past.
Right, but not ARPA funds. And who did I leave out? Experiment in Self-Reliance. Experiment in Self-Reliance, the Experiment in Self-Reliance request was totally for their IDA program, one for business and one for housing. So we've increased the housing this year. The ARPA was for business, and the operating cost is the operating request is exactly the same. So these are not new requests, and they're even not increased requests. They're the same as what they have been for some time. So yes, that was the consideration of that.
Okay.
So are we reaching a point where we're sort of okay for the option 3A with those? Would we, just to be for clarity, would it make any sense for Kyle to make the adjustment for a
unified option as discussed?
Yes.
Yes.
A unified option, consolidated option, maybe
I hesitate
better.
to,
I don't know if we're
hesitate-
sure we're unified, but we might be consolidated.
I hesitate to ask this
That's
question,
10%.
but the other difference also was the Medicaid expansion between
Yes,
3 and 5.
and I think that can go, for me, that doesn't matter. It either goes into reserve.
Well, I'm
or it
asking
stays.
just if I'm going to make a
I agree.
consolidated
But-
one.
And in fact,
I
the
just wanna make
difference,
sure.
right, the difference is going to be, it is going to reduce
It
the
would-
budget reserve by, I think only
Well, it
100.
would, let's see,
Well, it's going to be by 200, it's going to reduce it by 250.
it would add 200,000, but then you're going to
It's 75,
take off 100, 25.
change it to 175. Oh, and then we're taking off 25. Change it to 150, I
So I
think.
think it's 100,000.
Well,
right,
we
'cause
got a
you're-
20, it's 25, and 50 is a 75, and then it's 50-50. Crossover and Children's Law is 100, so that's 175, minus 25 would be 150.
Right.
Right. So, yes, and then it could be, yeah, so the reserve becomes 538, or it could be 738 if the Medicaid expansion
Right.
contingency remained in. And that's, in a sense, they're both kind of, if we had a problem with the Medicaid thing, we could also take it out of fund balance too, because we've exceeded our fund balance commitments anyway.
I would really like to leave the Medicaid expansion in. I'd rather be safe than sorry.
Well, it's just which sorry, where do you want to get the sorry, out of the contingency or out of the fund balance? I'm fine with it. It's just the reserve fund balance goes down to
Whichever.
538.
What's the best for you?
I would say we have some funds in contingency for it, but I can,
It doesn't matter to me.
this is your budget, so.
Not my budget, it's
No,
all of
I'm
our
saying
budgets.
it's the board's
It's just that
budget.
in
This
the
is the
dollars and
board's
cents of
budget,
the
so-
world of this, as far as what we're arguing over the dollars, it's only, it's kind of like, to me, it doesn't matter whether it's one place or the other, because it's still, in a sense, contingency. It's,
Well, we're not having anything in the budget saying we're removing that from contingency.
that's correct.
Okay.
It's not, currently, 3A leaves in the Medicaid expansion contingency.
Yes.
Leaves it in. It's a designated contingency, whereas fund balance
It
is
is additional
undesignated.
contingency for them.
Argue that.
Leave it? Okay.
So I think we're clear, and if we can all wait a few minutes, Kyle will be back. I mean, and he'll have
This is hard.
we'll have the consolidated, use that word, consolidated. Consolidated option.
So maybe I need to wait to ask, I'll wait to ask the question. I mean, ultimately, the question is, because we're going to prepare two full-blown budget ordinance, or a full-blown budget ordinance for option 3A and option 5, or maybe just one.
No, we're looking at having one option.
Okay.
Why was we talking about all this stuff?
All right.
Maybe somebody else is taking a nap over there. I don't know, just check, not listening.
We'll be back in a moment.
Just teasing.
Yeah, no, we're good. I'm going to take a recess, or, because it'll take them 5 minutes. Let's do a 5-minute recess.
We could do that.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Okay.
He's doing your math.
All right, well,
I was checking off.
you probably found an error on it, so
Discovered the discrepancy.
we did have one.
Thank you, Kyle, by the way.
No, it's, thank you. This is,
You can point out that the only difference between the two sheets of paper we passed out.
there's actually two because somebody just showed me something, but it's just a spreadsheet error. I'll go through it. But, so what you have here in this consolidated option, as the chairman said, really the difference is on one of them, we've got sheriff funds for detention, recruitment, retention at 233,386. And on the other one, we have the two sheriff investigator positions. And the 116,693 times 2 gets you to the 233,386. What I'll say, the other difference you'll see is at the bottom of that sheet, it appears that we are out of balance, but it's really just because one of these 116,693s is not being added. It was just a formula error that I didn't catch. It is still in balance. The bottom line is going to be a $569,555,264 budget that is balanced, and I'll fix that spreadsheet formula error. But that is really the only difference between the two. What we did do as well, so again, it adds the Children's Law Center at $50,000, Crossnor at $50,000. Neighborhood's Hands went up to $100,000, and iBank went to $100,000. Partnership for Prosperity was removed, and you've got $538,867 in a budget reserve for the county. So, and the tax rate is 67.78, which is what the tax rate was in the current budget. And again, everything is the same in that other sheet as well.
The sheet that has the two separate investigator positions on it, down at the bottom, the negative 177,630 should be 55,756.
That's correct. Yeah, that's what when I redid that sheet, it is not picking up one of these positions here. It was a formula error on my part.
Okay,
I didn't. It's basically not.
And the bottom line budget number should be 569, 555, 264. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Any questions about it? Now, the county manager has advised me, you advised me that we're good with this, that only one budget ordinance would be prepared. But we made a decision to start changing it again tomorrow, a long wait to redo a second budget ordinance. So, good with this one thing, or do we need two things to look at tomorrow? I'm just double checking.
Well, won't they need two things? It's two different options as far as the sheriff's concerned.
I think we're going to take it, I don't think that would require a different budget order. We're going to make a decision what number to plug in first.
Well, actually, what we would prepare is two options. One full budget ordinance if you want it with the two positions listed, and one full, and that way you've got an option one, option two in front of you, and you just make a motion and see where it goes. And that keeps us from scrambling in the background. We want to be prepared when you walk in here, and so.
Okay.
Well, so that I'm clear, I mean, if you turn it over, there's some error. So what we saw from you, is that what we're going to see tomorrow in the one option? I thought it was consolidated.
You'll see two options. One is going to have the detention, recruitment, retention. Second one will have special victims investigator and cyber crimes.
And following all the rest. Okay.
Essentially, the numbers,
Perfect.
the budgeted numbers will be the same in the budget ordinance there will be one section of the budget ordinance that is different, and that is the one where the board identifies how many positions the sheriff is allowed to have. That will be a difference.
Okay.
And then we'll have a couple of votes because we have to take out a couple of these appropriations due to conflicts.
Yeah, we'll actually adopt a base budget ordinance and then very quickly do some amendments to deal with the conflicts on the special probes. So,
So for example, like Callidium will not be in that one. And, we'll go through our other list.
So what you'll see is there'll be some unallocated money, and then in the amendments, it'll be allocated when the conflicted commissioner recuses him or herself.
right. And then the other thing we always do is spend a little bit of time and actually read through and summarize changes that have been made to the ordinance, because the budget ordinance is also the authorities that you give me and designees and staff to just get contracts written and to do all those kinds of things. We hadn't made major changes in them this year, but every year we go through that. Compensation levels for elected officials is always in there. We need to review that. And then board director initiatives and really all those sections. So, and we try to do that from the basis of what's different than last year's ordinance. So we'll spend a little bit of time with that, and then you'll be ready to vote.
You want to highlight the fourth board director initiative that you added?
Yeah, I think I mentioned, I put it at your place, in one of the breaks, talked a little bit to Commissioner Linville, and so I just added one, and it basically says, since we are continuing the operations of the recycling centers, add one that says, convene further discussion about the recycling initiatives countywide, including updated information about the franchise system, the county's recycling centers, and comparative cost per ton of the various programs. And so we would either do that in a morning session, really in working with the chairman and vice chair on when the best time to do that, or a winter work session.
Now, any more questions?
Remind me what we're doing with the fire tax. Are we doing that in the budget?
Our understanding, and the ordinance will include, and my understanding is that there's general consensus that the three changes are satisfactory. And so we would put those three fairly minor changes in the ordinance. I hadn't not heard any discussion to the contrary about that.
Okay.
Move we adjourn until 2 o'clock tomorrow.
I'll second that. Bro, any discussion?
We're going to start at 2.
I'm going to start at 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. Thank all of you.